Wonderful. I now welcome Mr. Ian Corby from the Age Verification Providers Association, joining us via video conference from the United Kingdom. Thank you for making time for us today. I'm not sure what time it is over there, but whatever it is, we appreciate you being committed to giving us evidence with our deliberations. Mr. Corby, as noted in your invitation, parliamentary privilege applies only to people giving evidence in Australia. Parliamentary privilege is a special right that means you cannot be prosecuted or disadvantaged because of anything you have provided in evidence that has been accepted by the committee or because you gave evidence. However, because this privilege only applies within Australia, a person outside Australia will not be protected. I know you understand all that. So, look, we appreciate you coming on anyway. For the Hansard record, could I get you please to state your full name and the capacity in which you're appearing for us this afternoon?
My name's Ian Corby, and I'm the Executive Director of the Age Verification Providers Association.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, Mr. Corby, do you have an opening statement? Great. I'll hand over to you and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you very much, Senators. So, as I said, I'm the Executive Director of the AVPA, and it's our mission to make the internet age aware. That's age aware, not identity aware. So we're a global trade body for privacy preserving suppliers of age verification technology. And our members deliver verification, estimation and inference methods, which can be audited against international standards and deployed globally. I'll try to keep my opening remarks very short, so we've got plenty of time for questions and supply a more extensive statement for the record. First of all, we're politically neutral, so we neither support nor oppose the policies your inquiry is considering, but we do call for strict privacy guardrails and clear accuracy targets when they come into force. I think there's a growing realisation the internet was never invented for children, and we're retrofitting safety, which is never easy. So we need to be pragmatic about how we do that. I can assure you there is no single silver bullet solution for this, and different use cases will merit different approaches. One thing we do believe is that the controls need to be allocated as close to the harm as possible, which was a recommendation of the Age Assurance Technology Trial. Only the platforms themselves know which elements of their service pose a risk to children, and some of these device-based options are a blunt instrument with significant legal issues around liability, which have been nowhere near resolved yet. Now, regulations requiring online age assurance should mandate privacy by design using independent third-party checks. Users should have the option of a double-blind architecture, which means the platform can never discover the identity of the user, and the age assurance provider cannot tell which platform the user is accessing. They should take advantage of zero-knowledge proof tokens, so platforms don't get any extra data about a person from the age check. Platforms should therefore approach this with a successive validation technique, risk-based, where they start with some of the low-friction estimation methods, perhaps like facial age estimation for those who are well over the minimum age, but then allow users who are closer to the legal minimum to step up to verify their age with alternative methods, such as an email address or a mobile phone number, or from authoritative data like the data their schools may hold. Platforms must be obliged to offer age assurance of last resort through professional vouching to guarantee accessibility and inclusivity to everybody. And we would suggest to eSafety that they should require in future certification against the latest standards, that's the IEEE and the ISO standards, to give more public confidence in data security, privacy and accuracy. I think that's one of the lessons we've learnt in the UK recently when age verification was brought in at great scale. Regulators should promote interoperability and the reuse of age tokens across services to cut friction to the user experience and minimise the cost of platforms. And finally, federal and state governments may need to facilitate privacy-preserving one-way blind checks against their own data sets for young people if they want to impose an exact minimum age. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corby. And I'll go first to Senator Ghosh. Yeah.
Thank you. Are you able to just elaborate on a few of those steps you were outlining in terms of putting effectively a third party between the user, be it a digital third party or an entity between the user and the social media platform for age verification processes? What does that look like in I'm sitting down at my computer as a 15-year-old trying to access social media, just in practical terms?
Thank you, Senator. This is an experience most UK children are experiencing already, along, of course, with the adults. So you would go to the platform you wanted to access, let's say it's TikTok, and you'd enter your date of birth as you're trying to start a new account, and they would say, great, we just need to check your age. We're going to refer you to our appointed age assurance provider, and then up would pop a window into which you then normally would have a choice of methods, so you could choose whichever method you wanted to use. Now, for somebody, dare I say, as old as you or I, we could probably use a facial age estimation or another biometric. There's one where you just move your fingers on the camera, which is quite clever. And then, but if we're a bit closer to the age, it says actually we can't tell that you're over 16, then you would move to a different method. So perhaps one which involves a document or your bank account, or possibly even, if the schools are willing to facilitate it, access to the dates of birth held by the school. Having established your age, then the third-party provider deletes all that data, any data they used for that purpose. That's assuming they used any data at all. There are some processes where the data never leaves the mobile phone in your hand. And then they simply send an answer back to the platform to say, yes, this user, we're not going to tell you who they are, but they're over 16.
So the age verification process need not involve the provision of data from the user to the social media company. That's the ultimate result.
We would never, yes, that is the ultimate. I'll tell you why that happened, because we date our sort of history to the adult industry, and the pornography companies were quite convinced they would lose all their customers if they started demanding seeing people's passports. So there was a very simple approach, which was to say, let's just get a third party to do that for us. Now, there have been some challenges with that, which we didn't foresee in the UK, where we are referring a customer from a site they may have heard of, like Reddit, for example, to their age verification provider they may never have heard of. Now, I've heard of them, and I think they're a great idea because they're audited and certified and supervised by data protection authorities. But the customers were a bit unsure about, well, hang on, who is this new organisation I'm being asked to trust with my data? Hence why we think it's important to audit and certify those suppliers so that the users can have a lot of confidence.
And what are the criteria for certification of a third-party age verification provider in the UK at the moment?
There's no formal requirement. So Ofcom requires what they call highly effective age assurance, but a little bit like e-safety, they've taken a principle-based approach. We'd like to see a more specific approach where you say, for example, your tech needs to stop at least 95% of kids under the age getting through this particular technology. But it also checks for your privacy and your data security to make sure you've got sort of the same kind of levels of security you'd expect when you go to your bank, for example.
Thank you very much. That's been very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Senator Henderson.
Oh, look, I might hand the call over to Senator Smith.
Oh, Senator Smith,
he had his hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr Corby, thank you very much for your participation this afternoon by our time, and I think it might actually be very, very early your time. You talked a bit about school facilitation in the age verification process. Can you just expand upon that for us?
Yes, I mean, there's been a lot of noise about facial age estimation and how it's, can't be more than accurate to within, say, 1.3 to 1.5 years for the top three, which were shown in the trial. And we've never argued that it would be possible to implement an exact 16 plus or 18 plus minimum age using the estimation techniques. That's really not why they're there. They're there to help people who are well over those ages. So for the actual date of birth, to check that today is your birthday and that you can open your first social media account, we are going to need access to something which has your real date of birth on. Now, there are plenty of options around that, but not everybody has a bank account. Not everybody has a passport. So in some cases, it will be ideal to have access to government-held data, which can be done on a one-way blind check basis. In other words, as a third-party provider, I don't get to see the data. I just get given the date of birth by the individual, and then I ask the government to confirm that that is accurate and true. So we call that a one-way blind check. But you are going to need to open up those sort of opportunities if you want to have that exact age for absolutely everybody. But as I said, there should also be a sort of a manual process of professionals in the community attesting to your age if you just can't get access to any alternative.
But I thought in your evidence you talked specifically about schools. Perhaps I misheard you.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, the obvious place to find, authoritative data about children's ages would be through schools. So there are already some schools which operate digital identity systems internally for the purposes of buying your school lunch and that sort of thing. So those you might see those models extending and schools making it more possible for trusted third parties to have access to just confirm that when a child claims that they've turned 16, they can just check if that's true or not.
Just out of interest, are these, in Australia we call them public or state schools and private schools. The schools that you're talking about in the United Kingdom, are they private schools, or I think your term is grammar schools, or?
So don't worry about the United Kingdom. I'm trying to talk solely about the Australia, which I've had the privilege to visit five times in the last 8 months as a part of this trial. So very familiar with what's happening there. So there's a company, for example, called My Mahi, which already has an integration into a number of schools in Australia. They're perhaps more available in New Zealand, but they were in the trial and they demonstrated this technique.
Right, and they are private schools or public schools?
I believe they can go into any school.
The ones that you're referring to, though.
Oh,
where
the state-operated schools in New Zealand, in particular.
Right. Okay. But nothing you can point to in the Australian context, which has been my question.
There is at least one school, because in the trial, if you refer you to the trial, the testing was done in an Australian school to demonstrate that their technology could work in an Australian. I believe it was a state school, but I would just need to confirm that.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks very much for your assistance today, Mr. Corby. The use of a third-party provider breaks the link between the data and the platform who's seeking the age verification. That's what you see as its principal benefit. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, particularly for any new data that's supplied solely for the purposes of an age assurance process, which we think should be handled entirely separately and then deleted as soon as it's been used.
Yeah, but of course, just simply using a third-party provider doesn't deal with what a lot of people's concerns are about providing their personal information online for the purposes of age verification. There's still a process of providing a whole bunch of quite incredibly personal information and potentially valuable to a hacker information online through that age verification process, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are still concerns. I mean, this minimises the risk. First of all, hackers could not access any data if the data is not retained. The only non-hackable database is no database at all. So we don't suggest that you retain that data. And our data minimisation suggests that shouldn't happen. And also, as a sector, we're under incredibly close scrutiny by data protection authorities. So here in the UK, I probably speak to the Information Commissioner's Office at least twice a month, and they know where to go to check that those services are being extremely careful with your data.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you're not incredibly familiar with Australia's privacy laws, where there is no legal obligation to delete data, absolute legal obligation to delete data. And we've had, countless significant data breaches in the last few years where incredible amounts of Australia's data has been hacked through quite reputable companies, Qantas, Optus, others you may have heard of.
Yes, I'm very familiar with those things. And this is why we're an odd industry. We want more regulation, not less. We would like to be held to the highest standards when it comes to deleting that data. Yeah. And that means a requirement by eSafety that any third party is audited and certified against the international standards that I mentioned.
But of course, none of those laws are in place. None of our privacy laws are up to that standard to require that kind of privacy controls. And so we're having this age verification debate before we've got our privacy laws up to scratch. That's a problem we're confronting.
OAIC. Yeah, I mean, the OAIC have provided with very detailed guidance on what their expectations are for privacy in this area very recently, just last week. But I would also, e-safety would have the power to include within its recommendations of reasonable steps the use of audited and certified third parties through JASANS, which is the relevant government standards body in Australia.
Well, whether or not that's available to e-safety, we'll ask this afternoon. But one of the most recent instances of a company using a third-party provider for age verification and finding themselves in a lot of trouble is Discord. Now, initially they said it was 70,000 government IDs that had been hacked through their third-party age assurance provider. More recent reports suggest it's 2.1 plus million government IDs that have been hacked through their third-party age assurance provider. Can you shed any light on what happened there with Discord?
I totally can. Excuse me if I correct you slightly, but it was their customer services database, which was the one which was the source of the leak. KID is the age verification provider. They've issued a statement to say they don't retain any data and they weren't hacked. That has been confirmed by the Age Check Certification Scheme, who are their external auditors and incidentally is the same organisation that ran the trial in your country. So it's wrong to say it was the age verification provider that was hacked. What I would say,
just
however,
on
is
that,
a very important lesson learned.
I was relying on the repeated public statements from Discord, where they said an unnamed third-party support provider was compromised, and Discord have said that publicly and repeatedly.
Yeah, that was called Zendesk. Zendesk is a very popular solution for multiple platforms, which their customer services team to record all kinds of complaints and handle those complaints and respond by email or text or using chatbots, etc., to people. The lesson learned is you need to handle the appeals just as carefully as the initial age checks. So Discord had done a good job on the initial age checks, but then we're just bandying around people's private identity information on a random customer services system, which was a terrible mistake.
So what happened was when people had, it's your understanding, is it, that people had put their data to the age verification provider, when they weren't satisfied with the outcome from the age verification provider, they then had contested that with Discord, and that's where the 2.1 plus million government ID docs were sitting in a pool and able to be hacked. Is that your understanding?
Exactly. Exactly.
I can only say, Mr. Corby, though, that whole story just is emphasising the dangers of going down an age verification process before we have unambiguous, clear privacy rules in place that require the deletion of data, that prohibit the collection of critical data. And we just don't have those laws in place in Australia. Do you think goodwill and hope are a substitute for good privacy laws?
No, I mean, I would recommend you do, as you suggested earlier, discuss this with Julia McGrath later, because I do think she would have the ability to require that. You are certified. That Zendesk system could never, in a month of Sundays, have been certified to our standards.
Yeah, but it goes to show, doesn't it, that the privacy controls, clear, unambiguous privacy controls that are there in black and white and hopefully legislated, are kind of the critical underpinning if you're going to have community confidence in an age verification system. Do you agree?
Yes, and I think the Social Media Act does make provision for that sort of privacy as well. So, as I said, it's not ideal without having a strong, like GDPR, as we have in the UK and Europe, which is very clear about the purpose limitation when you use data. But the principles that should apply in Australia do lend in that direction. But yeah, I would leave it to you to legislate further in that area if you think it's necessary.
Yeah. Have you had any visibility about how users in the UK have sought to get around the age verification requirements? We've had, people putting on masks, age masks, people using VPNs. I've got to tell you, last time I was in Northern Europe, and every single ad that I was getting on a podcast in the UK was about getting a VPN, and the sheer growth in VPN numbers seems to be quite extraordinary in the UK. Do you have any visibility on that?
Yeah, we think probably 2 or 3 million extra people are using a VPN based on some analysis we've done out of obviously sort of 60 million. And those are hopefully mostly adults, of course, because VPNs tend to come with a cost. I always do warn people that cheap or free VPNs are stealing more of your data than you could ever possibly imagine. So only ever use a good quality VPN. We have discussed this. It was in the trial. It was discussed in the trial as well. So first of all, when we audit and certify companies, we do test for very simple things like people using a mask and so on, and we can spot that. We've just finished a big project with the Swiss academics IDIAP on how you can use AI to spot AI, so you can also spot deep fake attacks on our technology. So this is part of the standard testing. Yeah. When there were some obvious breaches around the UK launch, we looked into those, and it turned out the platforms had deliberately turned off elements of the technology from their provider in order to make sure more people passed. So, in fact, they were not implementing highly effective age assurance. They had made those too easy to circumvent.
Mr. Corby, you may be used to what's been happening in the UK, but when I hear evidence of 2 or 3 million VPNs being part of people's response to age verifications, that shows a potentially very, very large gap or window through which people are moving to avoid age verification.
Yeah, so what we would suggest there, we've had this conversation with eSafety, is that, I believe it's reflected in the reasonable steps, that the platforms, particularly social media, need to look at the nature of the traffic they're getting from VPNs, and you can always spot VPN traffic, and see whether it looks as if it's likely to be from a user who is underage in Australia. And if it turns out that they're never using the social media platform, doing school hours in Australia, that their currency on their browser is set to the Australian dollar, and that they're using AEDT as their time zone, then you would ask them to prove that they're not in Australia or to do an age check.
Okay. The last set of questions, Chair, is the age verification trial that was done in Australia showed particular concerns for women and particularly for girls, accurately assessing age, people of colour as well, accurately assessing age. Is that consistent with your understanding of some of the challenges for age verification more broadly? That, you know, some of those groups you'd want to be mindful not to harm are potentially at the front of being harmed in age verification?
Yeah, so first of all, you're only talking about age estimation techniques, and within that, you're only talking about facial age estimation techniques. So the technique where you move your fingers, for example, is not going to have a problem with that bias. Those biases do exist. They're almost impossible to defend. Darker skin reflects light poorly compared to lighter skin, which means you get less detail to do the analysis on. But these are only going to affect the number of people who then have to go onto a secondary method of age assurance rather than passing because they look over 25, for example, a test to see if they're actually 16 or not. So it shouldn't exclude anybody from anything.
Well, but what it does seem to do is put in place quite significant potential systemic biases against people of colour and particularly against girls whose age, according to the trial and the data that came out of the trial, is being less accurately predicted through those age assessment tools. And you don't think we should be very wary about putting in a new system which starts with those preset biases?
Yeah, if you were saying the only method you can use is facial age estimation, then that would be seriously problematic, but that's not the approach. And actually, the reality is most of the social media platforms will be using all the data they have on their users at present to assess their age initially. And then it will only be those who are pretty much close to the age of 16 who would need to appeal that. And those appeals are never going to be handled with estimation anyway. They can only be handled with a real date of birth. So I don't share your concerns in that area, Senator.
All right.
Thank you. Senator Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Corby, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We are most grateful. Look, you may know that in Australia, with the legislation that's been passed for the social media ban, there is a restriction on the use of government ID or digital ID. I note that, and I've just been having a look at your website, that age verification methods include government identity documents such as a passport, driving licence, national identity card. I'm just keen to understand how you protect that information. So is it the case that is not stored for anyone who supplies that ID as a form of age assurance?
Certainly, if you're using any of our members who are certified to those standards, then you cannot store any of that information. You just extract the date of birth, and that's the only thing you're allowed to retain associated with a user. But again, you don't know who the user is. Going forward, we'll be moving to a system of tokenized solutions where, having done one age check, you just have an encrypted token on your device, and then any platform that you're going to for a set period of time will be able to rely on that token. And that's a much better system, which we'll be very shortly launching here in the UK.
Look, I'd greatly appreciate more information on that. If there's anything you could send us through on notice, I'd be most grateful. So when a user provides their identity document, could you just explain precisely, there's no retention of that data? It must be kept, obviously it would be kept by the age verifying company for a snapshot of time. So can you just take us through how that works, the technology?
Yes, I mean, the most you need it to actually do the job would be a couple of seconds, possibly less than a couple of seconds. You know, it's just long enough to extract the date of birth and to compare the photograph to a live image of the individual to make sure it belongs to them. So that could be just, as I say, a matter of seconds. Some regulators may allow you to keep that for 2 or 3 days just for audit purposes and for continuous improvement. But yeah, we're not talking about creating the level of data that was lost in the Discord hack, for example, where they just literally kept everything since time immemorial, which is, as I said, a terrible way of operating.
And so how would that data be retained for a few seconds or sometimes a couple of days? What is it sitting on?
So if it were to be retained at all, I mean, most of this data is just handled what we call in memory. So it doesn't actually, it's being processed in real time. It doesn't actually get saved at all. I'm just saying, I was just being very, very frank to say that you might, on occasions, for the purposes of an audit, for example, need to talk to the regulator about being able to keep something for a couple of days to do that check to make sure the technology is actually doing what it's supposed to do. But I'm sure that would always be done extremely carefully.
And so can I just understand, how is the age verification utilised in the UK? So what are the applicable laws that require age verification now?
So under the Online Safety Act, since July the 25th, all sites which include what they call primary priority harms, which is pornography and then information that helps children to kill themselves, to harm themselves or to starve themselves, that content has to be behind a highly effective age assurance method. And as with e-safety, the regulator here, Ofcom, has set out principles by which it would assess whether something's highly effective. And they've also set out a list of about 7 techniques that they think are capable of being highly effective. But obviously they sort of reserve their right to look at how good they are in practice. And that's effectively what you're doing in Australia, with some fairly high-level regulations to start with. I think the plan is to see how they go, and then come June of next year, when the reasonable steps are due for review, determine if you need to tighten those rules up at all, for example, by adding a 95% threshold, as we would recommend.
And so the work of Ofcom is only related to that particular content, not more broadly to young people accessing any content online?
So that's the primary priority content. There's more general, there's lower level harms. So, for example, stopping children being bullied online. Yeah. There's a slightly lower requirement there that websites and social media platforms need to minimise people's exposure to that. Again, in order to minimise the kids' exposure, they need to know who the children are. So but that can be in a more proportionate way. So you wouldn't necessarily need the highly effective age assurance. You could use a more generally effective level of age assurance for some of those less devastating harms.
Okay, so say in the case of 14-year-old children at a particular school in the UK, if there were serious threats of bullying and the like online, how is that prevented under your legislative framework?
So the platform shouldn't allow sort of that to be a systemic problem on their platform. So, for example, they might choose to, they have to do a risk assessment and say, right, our platform could be used for bullying. How can we deal with that? Then they have to come up with their own policies, which might be, for example, reporting and blocking, or not allowing a pile-on, for example, by having multiple contacts in a very short period of time. So it's very much down to the individual platforms to adapt their own policies, but they have to document those, and those are subject to review by the regulator.
We are going to have to move on, Senator Henderson.
Could you provide us with more information on notice as to the effectiveness of that regulatory framework? And any...
It's very new, but I'm happy to certainly point you towards where that's described.
Thank you. That would be fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr. Corby. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Corby, could I ask you to respond to allegations that kids are using things like Temu masks to get around age verification?
Yeah, this goes back to what I was saying about some of the platforms turning off the controls. So the audience certification process will have tested those third-party providers to make sure that you cannot get around them with simple and cheap methods. Now, obviously, if you've got $1 million and a supercomputer, that's a different case from some kid in their bedroom. But the testing is supposed to stop kids in their bedroom getting around these technology very easily. If a platform deliberately turns off those controls for right or for wrong, and frankly, we've had some difficult conversations with our members about whether they should have permitted that, then it is possible to get around some of those technologies. But I won't say it'll never be possible to get around things. It's like hacking, you know, it's like any cybersecurity. It's a constant game of vigilance. So you monitor the number of people who are passing your tests. And if suddenly there's an increase in the number of people passing, it's not because lots of people got older. It's normally because they found a new way around it. And then you need to quickly respond to that and deal with it. Mm-hmm.
And what about the fact that VPNs, the availability and the purchasing of VPN services have gone through the roof in the UK?
Yeah, and so VPNs are a very good thing if you're using a good quality VPN. I'm talking to you with one switched on at the moment to protect this communication. Cheap and free VPNs are very dangerous. They make their money by tracking everything you're doing online. In terms of the objectives of the policy, if it's only adults who are using that to avoid the inconvenience of age assurance, then that's not a problem. So we're only worried if we notice that the VPN traffic is likely to be children. That's obviously easier to do with social media because you're busy sharing a lot of information about yourself, which is pretty quickly going to allow the platform to realise you're a child in Australia. It is a bit more difficult with pornography, for example, where people share a lot less information. But there are still technical clues. The only thing a VPN does is change your internet protocol address. It doesn't change everything else we know about you technically and from your behaviours and choices about what you look at.
So are you suggesting that platforms, even if somebody has a child or a young person does have a VPN, that the platform can still work out that they're a young person and therefore shouldn't be able to access this in Australia? It doesn't make any sense to me if they're using a VPN from overseas.
Yeah, because the VPN is just suggesting you're located somewhere else, but you're looking at the content which other Australian children are looking at. You're looking at the same time that other Australians are looking at it. We can see from your browser what your currency is, what your time zone is. There are even more sophisticated techniques using big data where you have a fingerprint of your device, which is unique to your device, even if you've not said anything else to the platform. So it's not beyond the wit of man. It may take them a week or two to spot somebody doing that, but they can definitely spot them.
So surely this means then that the platforms can do this already. They know whether a child is on a platform. They know whether that child is accessing harmful material or dangerous material, and therefore the platform should be held responsible for that. Why are platforms why are platforms allowing children to access dangerous material now if they know it's dangerous and they're kids?
It's an extremely good question.
But you're saying they can do that. They know who the children are, and they can.
We know that it takes them within 6 weeks at most. That's enough usage to have an extremely good idea of the user's profile, and at the heart of the user's profile is their age. And we've seen historically platforms have been able to remove large numbers of children when they've chosen to do so.
So it says to me then that you don't need age verification technology to make sure platforms keep dangerous material off the accounts of children.
Well, I'm sure they'll be able to do a large amount of this themselves. You're probably using the age assurance technology around the edge cases. So those who feel they've been wrongly removed and want to appeal that decision, ideally, as I say, through our systems, not through Zendesk. But they will. I'm sure that's how they plan to approach it ahead of the December deadline, that most of them will be using their own internal systems, possibly supported through some of the technology that my members provide, but they will be applying that internally and only approaching the users for additional data in exceptional cases.
But Mr. Corby, what you're proposing creates a whole bunch of other privacy concerns, ongoing permanent monitoring of people's accounts, ongoing permanent data collection processes in place of people's traffic, where they went, when and how they log on. You're dealing with one problem and you're creating yet another significant privacy concern by proposing that structure, aren't you?
I wouldn't expect the social media platforms to be doing anything different in order for that to happen than they already do today. Now, if you want to take action about what they're doing today, then by all means, that's open to you as legislators.
Well, I think most people would be concerned about having 24-hour permanent surveillance of everything they do collected in a database and used by social media platforms. I have that concern. You don't share that concern?
I would recommend you don't use social media then, Senator.
Well, indeed.
Because, that's kind of inherent. It's inherent to their business model.
Of course it is, because governments like ours have failed to act to put in place proper privacy controls.
And it would make my life a lot easier if you had very strong privacy controls in Australia, because I wouldn't have to have this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Corby. Appreciate your time and
thank you,
and appreciate you getting up super early to speak to us. Thank you. Yeah,